So we recently published a report called the Loss of Control Playbook, Degrees, Dynamics and Preparedness. And in this video, we're going to talk about chapter 1 of that report, which discusses conflicting definitions of loss of control, the landscape of loss of control scenarios, and our taxonomy of loss of control. And so we'll jump right in and discuss the state of different definitions of AI loss of control today.
Yeah. So as part of the report, we found at least 6 different loss of control definitions across different policy documents, bits of legislation, reports, etc. And the problem that we found once we came across these definitions is that actually they don't always precisely match up that well. There's kind of disagreement or ambiguity between the different definitions. And we think that this ambiguity basically makes it difficult for decision makers to speak precisely when they're talking about AI loss of control, to say exactly what they're referring to.
Right, so we found they're similar in the sense that they reflect concerns about lacking human oversight or control over AI systems, but we also found that they're quite different in some ways.
Yeah, so basically we found that there's kind of convergence at the top end, but actually quite a lot of divergence. They differ a lot in terms of the minimum bar for severity or for persistence that would be required for a given event to count as loss of control. Maybe it's also worth clarifying, by severity here, I mean like things like how many people were affected and how badly they were affected by the event. And then by persistence, I mean something like how hard it is to stop the event from actually occurring.
Right, and so because we found that the definitions varied so much, we chose to focus on 2 definitions for this report, the EU's General Purpose AI Code of Practice definition and the International AI Safety Report definition. Can you talk us through why we chose those 2?
Yeah, so we picked out these 2 in particular basically because both of these documents were developed with a very diverse set of stakeholders, and therefore have this goal of trying to achieve some sense of consensus. Of course, additionally, the General Purpose AI Codes of Practice definition is pretty important for the enforcement of the EU AI Act and has strong regulatory relevance. But these 2 are a good example of how the definitions actually do have quite different emphasis. So maybe I can just talk them through this. So the General Purpose AI Codes of Practice definition is that loss of control is risks from humans losing the ability to reliably direct, modify, or shut down a model. Whereas the International AI Safety Report definition is that loss of control is scenarios in which one or more general purpose AI model comes to operate outside anyone's control with no clear path to regaining control. So if you keep these 2 definitions in mind, I think clearly the Codes of Practice definition is much more expansive. So under, I think, some quite reasonable interpretations of the Codes of Practice definition, we've in fact already had several instances of loss of control. Anytime an AI system basically doesn't do the thing that you wanted to, arguably you are unable to direct it. For example, a Replit AI coding agent just deleting some part of a company's code base. On the other hand, the International AI Safety Report, I think, has a much higher bar for what is the minimum level of severity of event that would count as loss of control. For example, in the Replit coding AI agent example, I think you'd be hard pressed to say that the developers in this case had no clear path to regaining control. The AI system deleted the part of the code base that was inconvenient, but it didn't kind of continue to cause damage. So basically, I think it seems like a problem that there are a bunch of scenarios and events that would be considered loss of control under some of these definitions, but not under other definitions.
Right, and as a result of this ambiguity, we turned to look at loss of control scenarios in the literature, and I believe we looked at 130 sources, but only found 12 detailed scenarios, so they seem to be quite scarce. Maybe you can talk us through 2 examples of scenarios that we did in fact find.
Yeah, so maybe the 2 that seem worth talking about, one is from a set of researchers from RAND. So this scenario involved an AI system getting deployed in the electricity grid in the US. It goes well, ends up being deployed worldwide, basically. At that point, the AI system starts over-optimizing, so it causes some minor blackouts in certain areas in order to preserve stability as a whole. These blackouts escalate, and basically the scenario ends up with the AI system trying to lock humans out of the electricity grid. More serious scenario that we looked at would be AI 2027. This scenario basically ends up with a misaligned AI system that is able to produce and release a bioweapon, and this basically leads to the extinction of humanity.
Right, and one of the centerpieces of chapter 1 of the report is this graph mapping loss of control scenarios. So how do we classify the scenarios and plot them on the graph?
Yeah, so we plotted the two scenarios according to the severity and their persistence. So as I said, severity is how badly people are affected, how many people are affected, and then persistence is the difficulty of preventing the AI system from continuing to cause harm. In order to actually plot the 12 scenarios, 12 concrete scenarios that we're able to come across, we used economic impact as a proxy measure for severity and for persistence. Often, or at least with a couple of these scenarios, making this economic impact estimate did involve making some additional assumptions, basically because the scenarios themselves didn't give quite enough detail on things like the geographical scope of the scenario and also on the length of time, so just like how long the scenario lasted.
Right, and on the graph, it says deviation, bounded loss of control, and strict loss of control. Can you walk us through what these mean and what this taxonomy is set out to achieve?
Yeah. So, as you say, three different categories that we use. These are representing escalating levels of severity and persistence of loss of control outcomes. At the very lowest level, we have deviation. This is meant to capture events that cause some harm, cause some inconvenience, but ultimately they're either pretty simple to contain or they just don't cause that much harm overall. Secondly, we have bounded loss of control. This is meant to capture events that are kind of closer in level to like a global catastrophe. These are things which are ultimately possible, though they may be very difficult to contain. And then at the highest end, we have strict loss of control. This is referring to events which are maximally severe, maximally permanent, things like the extinction of humanity. Maybe one interesting takeaway from the report is that if you look at the graph, you can see that actually the scenarios that we ended up finding in the literature do tend to cluster in this bounded loss of control category rather than the other two.
Right, and maybe you can say more about how you hope this taxonomy will actually be used in practice.
Yeah. So I think that the problem that this taxonomy is trying to solve is that, at least at the moment, if a decision maker is talking about loss of control, some loss of control scenario, they really could be referring to like any point on the graph here, from like pretty minor operational hiccup all the way to an existential threat, depending on which of the loss of control definitions that we talked about that they're adhering to. And basically, the taxonomy means that decision makers can be a bit more precise about the kind of magnitude of the loss of control that they're referring to, and hence to make better decisions around both the like amount of resources and the type of interventions that you could put in place in order to try and mitigate some of these scenarios and try and prevent them from happening or prevent harm from occurring.
Right, that makes sense. Do you think there's anything else you want to mention about the taxonomy?
Yeah, I mean, maybe firstly, some of the kind of challenges that came alongside it. So basically, I'd note that devising accurate metrics and boundaries for the taxonomy was definitely difficult. We think of what's in the report as being basically a first suggestion to try and help us directly compare different loss of control scenarios. This is a pretty difficult task. And I think we do hope that these can be solidified further with more research, particularly, I think, around like better calculations or more accurate ways of approximating the severity and persistence for this set of events. Maybe another thing worth noting in terms of the like practical implications is that a loss of control scenario might not stay in one category. So an event which starts as a deviation, I think, could definitely cascade into bounded loss of control or strict loss of control. I think it could be pretty hard to categorize in real time which of these categories a specific scenario is falling into. And for this reason, I think you might take the approach of treating deviations as like a canary in the coal mine, giving you some signal about the potential for more serious events to come along later.
Right. And about avoiding bounded and strict loss control, especially, that's something we talk about in chapter 2 of the report. Thank you for watching. If you're interested in more of this, then check out our website, apolloresearch.ai, where you can find more of our work, including, of course, this one, and where we go into a lot more depth on this topic.